Want your finger bent? Then don't ask about Bernadette. Everyone keeps asking Brian about what happened to Bernadette. Brian though doesn't say anything even though he was the last person to see her before she disappeared. Bernadette was a lovely old woman and the whole community loved her. On the night of her disappearance, it showed on CCTV, Brian coming out of her house and doing a little slow dance in her front yard, all on his own. When a man demanded Brian to tell him where Bernadette was, Brian bent his fingers backward and he was in pain. Brian then started doing a slow dance on his own, twirling away. Then when a woman angrily confronted Brian and demanded to know where Bernadette was, all Brian would tell her was that he cannot say. The woman wasn't having it and she was shouting at him and swearing at him. Brian stayed strong though and took all the shouting and accusations on the chin. Brian started choking up and all he said that I cannot say where she is. When the woman replied that she didn't give a poop, Brian bent one of her fingers backward. Then Brian started slow dancing on his own as they did in World War II times in dance halls before the soldiers were sent off to war. Then eventually the police took Brian into custody and everyone was so pleased that the police had him. In Brian's cell, there was another prisoner in the same cell. The prisoner was intrigued to know about Bernadette's disappearance, but all Brian would say that he cannot say. The other prisoner was getting excited and wanted to know about what had happened to her, but Brian just kept on ignoring him. Then the other prisoner told Brian that everyone thinks that he did something to her, as he was the last person to see her and he went inside her house. Brian then replied to his prison cellmate by bending his fingers backward and started dancing on his own. The other prisoner screamed and Brian was taken to another cell. When a detective was questioning Brian, he kept demanding Brian tell him about Bernadette. Brian kept replying that he couldn't and the detective kept getting more louder and insisting that he should tell him. Brian then held the detective's hands and then bent one of his fingers backward. As the detective was crying in pain, he saw Brian dancing slowly on his own. The detective shouted in pain, "Where is Bernadette?" And the Brian replied, "Where is your bent finger pointing?" The detective's bent finger was pointing to the ceiling and what he saw in the ceiling was Bernadette floating with a menacing smile and evil embrace, and she had occulting and ritualistic objects and markings on her naked floating body. "She likes dancing. I'm distracting her with dancing." "Get out now," Brian told the detective.